Premise: culture is the lens we use to understand stories. Welcome to Everything is Lit, where we treat anything and everything like literature and dissect it. Today we're going to talk about culture and how it relates to literature. This relationship is important to discuss because when we analyze something as literature, we have to remember that our analysis is always going to depend on our cultural position, and we have to take into consideration the way an author's positionality shapes the work they have created. I borrow the word positionality from social science fields. According to dictionary.com, positionality is the social and political context that creates your identity in terms of race, class, gender, sexuality, and ability status, and how those factors influence your understanding of the world. In other words, our way of understanding the world is rooted in our cultures. In this way, Mark Twain's iconic advice, write what you know, comes to life. Creators tend to base their work off of their understanding of the world, which is filtered through the lenses of their culture. For example, in the episode of Everything is Lit on the movie Uncut Gems, we talked about the evolution of tragedy. During the time of the ancient Greeks, tragedies consisted of a main character making a decision that changed their fate, usually for the worse, and elicited pity or fear in the audience. Tragedies back then were used like cautionary tales and to analyze human nature. For Shakespeare and his contemporaries, however, tragedies involved the internal conflict of their main characters, who were usually members of nobility or had some other high stature. So Shakespeare's plays were accessible emotionally for their audiences, while novel in their display of the high life that commoners would not have been privy to. Finally, in the 20th century, tragedies evolved yet again to incorporate the perspectives of average folks and their struggles in capitalist classist societies. This too makes sense when we think back to the post-World War II social and political climate. We saw the birth of the American dream, the clash between socialism and capitalism, anti-war, anti-racism, and anti-LGBTQ discrimination movements, and other rapid changes. Thus, tragedies in any given time period reflect the mindsets and attitudes of the people writing, reading, and watching them. In a larger sense, the way we understand a body of work and its artifacts, in other words, its symbols, themes, metaphors, lessons, and more, will depend on both our assumptions about the way the world works and should work, and those of the author. Anime, for instance, is a widely popular media form. However, since it originates in Japan, many series contain artifacts of Japanese culture that non-Japanese audiences don't understand or relate to. One specific example is cicada symbolism. American anime fans will probably miss the significance of cicadas, especially since the critters aren't everywhere in the United States and only emerge every couple decades. However, as Chris Kincaid writes for Manga Tokyo, cicada imagery has existed in Japanese literature for a long time. They typically signify summer and set the tone for a scene. And apparently, when paired with the imagery of power lines, they can indicate how fleeting a moment is. So, when interpreting a scene from, say, Steins Gate, we Americans might have missed the significance of including those. Interestingly, now that anime is more mainstream, many show and manga writers have started appealing to international audiences. For example, My Hero Academia contains many references to American geek culture, like Star Wars and comic book superheroes. So we know that a creator's culture influences the types of stories they tell and how. We also know that your culture influences how you interpret those media you consume. But what exactly is culture? Well, according to the Oxford Dictionary, culture is the collective sum of groups' art, achievements, customs, and social institutions. Similarly, Wikipedia defines culture as the umbrella term for the social behaviors and norms found in human societies, and they add that those norms define the acceptable ways of behaving. Finally, the American Psychological Association defines culture as the distinctive norms, values, beliefs, knowledge, art, and language of a society or community passed on from generation to generation that guide everyday behaviors and practices. You are born into your culture, and it frames how you see the world. The things you learn and observe from family, friends, institutions like school, the stories you hear and read and watch, all shape how you behave, what you believe, and what you value. To see just how culture impacts us, consider the following questions. Number 1. When you pay the bill at a restaurant, do you leave a tip for the servers? Number 2. Do you wear white after the first week in September? Number 3. Did you ever read books like 1984, To Kill a Mockingbird, or Catcher in the Rye in school? Your answers to each of these questions depend on your cultural context. Since we've been talking about Japanese culture so far, let's continue. In Japan, tipping your servers is not only rare, it can also be seen as rude. Meanwhile, in the United States, it's the exact opposite. It's considered rude not to tip. In fact, we have unwritten rules that govern tipping. You can tip your servers, drivers, and delivery workers, but you wouldn't usually tip your postal workers, waste management workers, or cashiers. Why is that? because our cultural traditions deem it so. Another American custom, which we happen to share with Canada, is not wearing white after Labor Day. Marie Claire cites that the origin of this tradition is unclear. It could have been due to upper-class people trying to make the color exclusive to them since it was considered leisure wear, or for more practical reasons, since white was associated with warmer weather, and September is the start of the cooler seasons in North America. Either way, the tradition is considered old-fashioned, and now plenty of people wear white after Labor Day. This means that this cultural custom is defined by both location and generation. Finally, to bring this all back to literature, the types of books you read in school depend on your cultural context too. In some states in America, books like Catcher in the Rye are banned for several reasons, from religious to moral to democratic. This means that based on your state's values, you may not have been exposed to certain media. Of course, you can add another layer to this consideration based on whether you attended public or private school or were homeschooled. So what does this mean for us? First, it means that whenever we dissect literature, we have to consider our positionality, meaning we pay attention to how our culture is impacting our analysis. And we have to remember the creator's positionality. Also, it means that you can expect more videos like this on the ways that culture influences how we tell and understand stories. And finally, it means that I am challenging you to think about how your culture filters the information you receive. What do you believe in? What do you take for granted? How can you broaden your perspective knowing that others may understand the world differently because of their cultures? Once you answer those questions, you open yourself up to all kinds of possibilities, which is absolutely necessary for treating everything like literature. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you can be the first to know when a new episode is posted. And as always, stay lit.